Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to the FCPA Compliance Report. First, have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? You wanted to talk about something in the compliance or compliance-related field, but really had no idea how to get started? Take a listen from our sponsor, One Stone Creative.
If you are enjoying this show, you might enjoy hosting your own. As an expert in your field, you have skills, knowledge, and insight that can help you expand your practice, meet new people, and create amazing content to share with the world. In as little as 2 hours a week, you can dramatically change how you promote, fill, and position your business. And One Stone Creative can show you how. Learn more at onestonecreative.net.
This episode is quite a bit of fun as I visit with Scott Moritz. Scott's a good friend, and he's the Managing Director, Global Lead at Protiviti Forensics. We take a look at the Varsity Blues scandal, but from really the forensic angle. Scott talks about the root cause analysis of the scandal and what colleges and universities who are not implicated in the scandal should be doing at this point. With so much in the public domain, there's a lot that you can use as a roadmap going forward. And Scott Moritz provides that for you. It's a fascinating example of how you use root cause analysis and forensic skills in current events. I know you will enjoy it. Finally, the FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and you are in for a real treat today because I have with me Scott Moritz. Scott is the Managing Director, Global Lead at Protiviti Forensics. I've known Scott about as long as I have been in the compliance arena, and he is one of not only the top practitioners in compliance, but he's also one of the top thought leaders. And he has agreed to come onto the podcast to talk about the Varsity Blues scandal from a little bit different perspective. So, Scott, with that incredibly long-winded introduction, first of all, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity to join you today, Tom. Always a pleasure.
Scott, there's been obviously a lot written about this case. A lot of individuals are ensnared in it. Universities are ensnared in it. But you had an angle that I really wanted to explore, which was universities who are not named and who have not been alleged to have been a part of this. What should they do to basically pressure test their systems to see if there was any undue influence or perhaps even anything worse?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I feel like so much in compliance is about applying lessons learned, not necessarily things that have directly affected your organization, but also kind of being somewhat grateful for not having been directly impacted, and then honest with themselves in terms of could this have happened to our organization, and should we go through the process of applying root cause analysis as though it had happened at the organization. So the nice thing about a scandal that has been widely reported on, it has a fair amount of detail in the public domain that could provide a roadmap to educational institutions, particularly the elite educational institutions that are, a part of Varsity Blues or could have been, and just determining, hey, if we had similar circumstances, would our controls have detected it? Would our personnel have understood the implications of acquiescing to the bribe? What kind of rigor could we be applying to our student athletes to make sure they are in fact legitimate student athletes and aren't being miscast as such? And that sort of thing would then, hopefully kind of lead to somewhat of a roadmap to those organizations to better align their organizational ethos with what's actually happening inside the university vis-a-vis the admissions process.
Well, Scott, would you advocate, or I guess maybe I should step back, can a entity such as a university or college who has not had a violation perform a root cause analysis, or is this more just an investigative oversight?
So, I mean, I think it can be. I mean, listen, a strict interpretation of root cause analysis is something has to have happened. So it's more kind of a hybrid, right? Applying some of the same techniques that you would apply in performing root cause analysis to your organization. And I think you used a really good term a moment ago, which is to pressure test your control environment and to see if, in fact, you as an organization, you as an educational institution, are susceptible to the types of admissions fraud that was going on in the universities. And I think one interesting dynamic also that has happened that is worth looking at. If a university is going to go through this process, they shouldn't look at things too narrowly through the Operation Varsity Blues lens. They should also kind of look more broadly: is anyone exercising undue influence over admissions? Because the open secret that I think everyone is well aware of is that big donors to universities wield considerable influence over the admissions process. Nobody wants to acknowledge that, but I think no one's going to be able to demonstrate that it's not happening.
Well, Scott, there are so many moving parts in Varsity Blues. We had individuals who were engaging in alleged illegal behavior to actually change SAT scores. We have the testing companies who allowed persons with an appropriate or a doctor's note to basically have a not an unlimited time to complete the test, but longer than the typical student. We had the universities themselves, we have the parents, and we have very independent persons within universities, such as those in the athletic department, whether it be an athletic director, whether it be a tennis coach, or other athletic figures in this. How could a university begin to think through all of these moving parts, or would you advocate they simply focus on the control environment which they operate?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of moving parts, and I think really, at the heart of it is, candidates that are have been designated for admission, and the decision hasn't yet been finalized. I think certainly those that have been whose either academic scores or test scores fall outside of the normal parameters warrant special attention. So what is it about this candidate that warrants admission if they don't fit neatly within our criteria? And then, to the extent that they have been flagged as a prized recruit for one of the athletic teams, perhaps challenging the documentation a little bit, and it could be something as simple as the nice thing about having a talented high school athlete is they make news, and if you've got someone that's been characterized as a Division I caliber athlete who's been designated for admission, what news stories have been reported about that collegiate athlete and their accomplishments? Because if they are, being miscast as these elite athletes, and yet there's no news media about them having won track meets or finishing in first place in a crew event or water polo or the various sports, tennis, soccer, etc., that were flagging these as recruits, then that right there kind of could call into question the legitimacy. I think it may be a little bit more challenging to get behind the test scores and whether or not they were taken in an environment that wasn't corrupted because I don't know to what extent admissions has visibility into whether someone was given test accommodations for a disability. And, I hesitate for them to even go there. It's so repellent that these students were being mischaracterized as needing test accommodations so that they could corrupt the proctors. But that's it would be interesting to explore to what extent admissions offices have some visibility into that.
So, how would you suggest a university even begin to start? Should they simply maybe even start with outlining the admissions process, but not simply Tom Fox or Scott Moritz sending in an application along with our essay and SAT scores, but really look at every place at the university where students either could be admitted or at least even recommended for admission?
I think so. I think they really need to kind of be very introspective and look, end to end at the process. You hear about certain universities where, and I know this from being the father of student athletes, coaches wield some degree of influence about people who gain admission who have the potential to play on their teams. I want to say that they get a certain number of chits per school year that they can use to perhaps put a student athlete over the top. And then the question, of course, becomes, is this a legitimate athlete? So obviously there's so much attention being paid to this that I can't imagine that would be the door through which an otherwise unqualified candidate would come now. But, you have to absolutely plug that hole. But then I think more broadly, there needs to be, an understanding of the universe of people that are advocating and lobbying admissions, and just gaining understanding is, okay, this is a worthwhile student, and here's some mitigating factors that would make them more suited for admission, or is it somebody that is absolutely just trying to leverage their donor position to get a otherwise unqualified candidate admitted to the university?
Scott, one of the things that I think you and I have talked about over the years is what to do when the government comes knocking. But here we're talking about how to prepare for even that eventuality. How would a university or other one of the things that you've talked about so that if a federal look at this process and maybe even developed a roadmap for remediation thereafter?
So, I think, you touch upon a really good point, and and I think you and I are very like-minded in this regard. The Department of Justice, the SEC, they have endeavored to be very transparent in terms of how they go about evaluating an ethics and compliance program in determining whether there is an effective compliance program in place at the time of an offense. And the framework that they use are the hallmarks of an effective compliance program. So it just stands to reason that if you are, seeking to lower your risk of ethical violations and criminality, you should use the same type of framework that the government would use, so that you don't have to turn yourself inside out if you do have to explain the details of your program to the government. Why not use the same terminology that the government uses? It just makes it so much easier for them to grasp that, yes, in fact, you have embraced the hallmarks of an effective compliance program. You've taken measurable steps to not only create a program that covers off all 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program, but you've taken that added step to operationalize them with very strong controls underlying each of the 10, to the extent that they're all relevant. Not, I'm not sure that there are a lot of universities that are doing acquisition due diligence, for example, but many of the other hallmarks are very applicable because, that's a great way to convey, to the government that, you got the memo, and you acted on it, and you took, reasonable steps to stand up a robust program. And then what we have here isn't some sort of institutional practice. It's an anomaly.
Scott, in terms of the types of investigations the government might do, kind of drawing upon your professional background before you were at Protiviti, what would, if a regulator, if the DOJ, if the FBI or the SEC came in on a forensic basis, what are some of the things you think they might want to look at?
So often the government wants to see electronic communications, emails, instant messaging apps. A lot of attention is being paid to disappearing messaging apps and what the organization's policy on their use. The extent that these are, it's a bring your own device policy, or these are organization owned communication devices, tablets, smartphones, laptops, and desktop computers. So, there's also, other types of instant messaging communications, Chatter and Yammer are two that come to mind. These are often the foundation on which criminal cases are made. In stunning amount of cases, people speak pretty freely in business communications about illegal acts. Sometimes they speak in code, but just to even the untrained eye, it's so obvious that someone is speaking in code. I think it's more damning than it is to actually speak overtly about the subject at hand. But those electronic communications are often so critical to establishing whether there's been a violation, and of course, then it's a useful tool for compliance, and it's a useful tool for internal investigations. What are we doing here? And for that matter, do people understand that an email lives forever? Because that'd be useful information, particularly in an educational institution where maybe they're not getting the same steady diet of compliance communications as they might in a corporate setting.
Scott, with the continued focus on this case, and because some people have pled not guilty, there may be additional indictments. The investigation may expand. It seems to me that this is a really clear signal for every institution of higher learning to take some steps to see where they might be if they would have any problems. And would it be fair to say that you're really suggesting that they need to get out ahead of this now and see if there are indeed any problems in their shop?
I really do. It's not as though this is the first scandal that has affected a major university. There have been a succession of scandals that have affected major universities over the past 10 years. You don't have to go too far back on the timeline to zero in on some other examples. I think one of the differences, though, if you contrast educational institutions to corporate America, is the response. That you don't often see a robust compliance remediation plan at a university, at least not in the same with the same frequency as you do in a corporate setting. There's Appendix C in every deferred prosecution agreement provides a roadmap for the compliance remediation expectations of the government. And I assume that in extreme examples it's happening at major universities, but I just don't think that the whole compliance focus has taken root in too many major universities.
Well, it's been my experience, and I'm the son of a professor, so perhaps I have a little more knowledge than the average bear, but almost every university and almost every college has some form of federal funding. And if they have federal funding, there are going to be federal requirements. And having policies and procedures and controls in place to prevent bribery and corruption is a part of every federal grant requirement. So I'm sure those obligations are there, even if people have not dusted those off and looked at them for some time going forward. Scott, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I was wondering if there's any other thoughts you might have sort of in wrap up, or where folks should go for more information on this.
Just some final thoughts. Our elite educational institutions have, many of them, have their curriculum is around business ethics. Their mission statements talk about how they're instilling ethical business practices and leadership ideals to our future government and business and community leaders. Those words mean something, and they should be looking inward with those mission statements and see, are those words ringing hollow based on actually how the organization has stood up an ethics and compliance program? Are they living up to the high standards that they have portrayed in the mission statement? And if they're not, then they've got some work ahead of them.
Scott, that's a great point to end on, and I think you've given me the title of this podcast. So I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me, and I greatly look forward to continuing the conversation.
Tom, thanks so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I would thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. If you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I hope you'll join me again next week, where I take up another topic in FCPA compliance. The FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.